Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Spring 2021 Lecture and Masterclass series. We're joined today by Lida Winfield and Christal Brown, giving us a specific teacher's workshop called A Body of Knowledge. I'll let them take it away from here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, friends, supporters, colleagues. My name is Christal Brown, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, collaborator, and friend, Lida Winfield. And today, in this Body of Knowledge workshop, we want to give you an inside kind of tapestry of how Same But Different was built, but also some interactive ways to engage with us. So if you see that link at the bottom of your screen, please feel free to jump over into the Zoom so that we can talk to you directly and make sure that you get the full experience of what this is like. We're also going to save some time at the end for questions about the piece if you've had a chance to view it. And I'll hand it over to Lida.
Great. Good morning. It's so nice to be with you. So nice to be here. And always nice to be with Christal Brown. We also have a closed captioner with us, Sherry, who we're so delighted is here. So if that's useful to you to see our words as well as to hear them, feel free to turn that on. You can make them bigger or move them to the side for whatever is best for you. So we want to talk you through again, how we made Same But Different, but also how that is part of our pedagogy as educators and how we've come to be teachers and thinking about education and thinking about our classroom. I think the place to start is that fundamental principle of both Christal and I's pedagogy is really thinking about access and thinking about how you welcome the people that are in the room. And so here we are together, just the two of us, but we're recognizing that we're welcoming you wherever you are, out in your community, in your office, in your home. And part of what that looks like is that we often both have a preliminary plan in our minds of what we're going to teach and how we're going to deliver that, but recognizing that that is malleable and changeable in the moment given how the interaction goes. And so perhaps that's also true for those of you that are educators, that you, again, have this basic idea of what it is that you're going to teach, but then you're able to translate that or move that around and make a different choice if you see clearly that it's not landing with the students and that there's no give and take in that. So I think, again, that's really partly about access, but it's also about really teaching to who's in the room and having a relationship with those particular individuals. Part of what we did with Same But Different was I don't know, Christal, you want to talk us through about how Same But Different came to be?
Sure. So Same But Different was actually a kind of flippant idea, similar to what Lida is talking about in terms of pedagogy. Artists kind of function as improvisational leaders. And if any of you have read books like Emergent Strategy or the idea of creative process or human-centered design, it's that saturation in a certain type of knowledge that allows you to pull from the aspects that you know to be true at the time and create something new, right? So when we think about your role as educators and our creative process here, we're both kind of doing the same type of life simultaneously in parallel tracks. And so we happen to intersect at a place called Bates Dance Festival at Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. And we got to observe each other. And my observation of Lida was that we were more similar than different in ways that people wouldn't know because of who we are, the way that our careers were built, and what we look like. And so I approached her and said, I think we should make a piece about how similar we are, but how the world would never connect the dots because they don't think we look alike or we dance alike. And that was in 2016. And so from there, what we actually started to do was develop a process of inquiry and curiosity about each other that we then started to document through video recordings and audio recordings. And those conversations actually became the piece that you're watching. What we did need to do is, similarly, when you're writing a manuscript or a screenplay or anything of that nature, you need an editor. And so we brought in a dramaturg by the name of Nicole Biancasino, who could go through the stories and be with us in the space and kind of tease out the real potent parts that were going to translate best to an audience that didn't necessarily know Lida and Christal's similarities, or maybe were fans of Lida, or maybe were fans of Christal, or just maybe wanted to see something different, but things that would resonate with the human experience, not just with two dance educators.
So obviously, Christal and I are both dancers, and that means that having a physical practice has been part of our individual lives and part of our teaching. So I think for both of us, teaching dance is obviously about teaching dance, but it also is about recognizing that we have bodies. And then I often like to quote Sir Ken Robinson, who's an educator that I like a lot, that speaks to that nobody ever came to a meeting without a body. And so, even if you don't like your body, or even if your body doesn't work very well, you still had one. And it still brought you someplace into the world. And that is useful as a thing to know that your body has knowledge and it has wisdom. And that kinesthetic learning is actually anything that you do with your body. Sometimes I think we have this idea as educators or as people that kinesthetic learning is this far away, distant, kind of abstract, has to be artsy thing. But really, kinesthetic learning is what most of the working world is, right? Which is like you get a job and somebody says, let me show you how to make a cappuccino. And then they say, the cappuccino's not good. Let me show you how to do it again. And you do it. And that's kinesthetic learning. And so, again, another pillar of our pedagogy is how to have your body be part of who you are in the world, not separate from. That we are integrated with our minds and our bodies. And so we see that in our teaching practice. Maybe that's in your teaching practice also, is how do you include a physical nature as part of education? And then what we did with Same But Different is that we were gathering these stories and really thinking and talking to each other, but then we were also quickly including our bodies. So we did this thing that we call a try on in one of them, for example. So one of us tells a story and the other embodies that story. And we're embodying that story to the best of what we can imagine, right? So obviously it's not literal, but that there is an essence of, okay, how do I imagine what it feels like to be Christal? How do I imagine what it feels like to be her as a child, or to be her as a grown-up, or to have her lived experiences? And in that, we get to build empathy with each other, which is another practice of our pedagogy in teaching, is thinking about empathy.
And that practice of integrating empathy to an education setting may feel like it's something new, but it's actually something that we kind of tease away as we become higher or more clear about our expertise. And so as college professors, we actually want to really challenge you as colleagues to think of yourselves as educators, right? Really to think of the difference between an educator and a professor, having knowledge that you can show and express through your own understanding, or cultivating understanding through your own knowledge, right? Really thinking about how we integrate that. Many of our classrooms, especially via Zoom, have become tight and kind of uneventful, right? And we don't get that feedback that we're used to getting in a one-on-one or in-person setting. And so I want to invite you to reframe it today in a way that, thank you for coming to my home. If you were here in person, I would offer you a drink. I would offer you a seat. But this is not a virtual background. This is my home. This is the place that houses my body, my thoughts, my imagination. And I'm so happy that you were able to join me here today. Knowing that many of our students don't have that way of inviting you in. They might have a place in their life, their mind, in their environment that is not welcoming. And so how do you then just change and reframe that to welcome them into your space? As we do that, we're actually thinking about moving our students from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic nervous response. Your sympathetic nervous system tells you fight, flight, or freeze. So this particular interface, this online interaction, is similar to kind of the mental or emotional Serengeti, where we might be prey or predator, right? We never know when we open up our phones or open up one of these Zoom meetings how we're going to be perceived, or what it's going to take for us to feel comfortable in perceiving the environment and actually taking a hold of the learning. So when we channel that type of understanding into a process or a ritual that we create for entering these types of spaces, then we're automatically disarming that fight, flight, or freeze mentality, that sympathetic nervous system response, and putting our students into a parasympathetic nervous system response, which is rest, digest, and create. Right? And as we're learning, it's imperative that we're in a rest, digest, and create mode, not a fight, flight, or freeze, because the actual information cannot enter our being, our minds, our our intellect and be transformed into actual knowledge without our bodies kind of being at rest and ready to receive. We'll give you a couple tools to do that today. Right? So let's just jump in. Right? So here are a couple tools. At the beginning of all our workshops, or my workshops, my classes, we have a mantra that says, a lot of things happen before this. I guarantee a lot of things will happen after this, but I promise to be here with you now. Please be here with me now. My students, my colleagues, my clients know that after that mantra is said, I'm bringing my full self to the experience, and I hope that they will too. Right? Then we also go through a couple of deep breaths just to place the body and the mind in the same place. And then, of course, because we're dancers, we like to do a little dance party at the beginning of all the things we do, right? Not because we love to dance, but it's actually been proven, right, that by the New England Journal of Medicine, that the body and the brain are so interconnected that every time your body moves in a new way, a new neural passageway opens up in your brain, which in essence makes you smarter, but also makes your brain more malleable, and the neuroplasticity of your mind continues to open up day by day, moment by moment.
Part of what I think you hear us saying is like, okay, you have the content that you're working to teach, right? So maybe for you it's math or it's science, and for us maybe it's dance. And I think some of that lens, right, is obviously the content matters, right? There is value in really studying the book. There is value in really studying the math or whatever, again, the content is. But then there is these other values that we're also thinking about. And sometimes for me, like I think about them as my essential question for those of you that are studying education, right? Or working to become teachers, that is, again, sort of what are my underlying goals that sometimes I might say explicitly to a class, but sometimes I might not, depending on what they are. And so again, that's about having a body, having your full self be inside of the room, recognizing that there's a give and take inside of that what I do, how I behave as the educator sets a tone for how the student behaves, and that give and take back and forth. And I'm also thinking about community. How do students interact with each other, and how can I help facilitate that so it goes smoothly? I was actually just looking at a survey that was done here at Middlebury College, where Christal and I are both professors and educators. And part of what this survey was showing is that students often felt comfortable with the professor, but uncomfortable with their peers. And it brought up for me this question about who's responsible for that. And it made me think actually that we are. And that sometimes there's this sense of like, well, I'm just doing the best job that I can in a classroom, and then how students behave with each other is up to them. And I appreciate where that comes from, but I also think that it is our responsibility about how we set that tone with each other. And so one of the ways that I do, and maybe you do this also as an educator, is that I try and really set up norms early on in the class. I used to do them on the very first day, particularly when I worked in elementary schools, to say like, okay, how's this going to work? How do you want me to behave if somebody does something that breaks the rules? What are the rules? What is that going to look like? And part of that is to tease out about the word respect. So when I say what respect looks like to me, it might look different than it does to Christal, or might look different to a student. That respect actually has many different cultural contexts based on our families, where we grew up inside this country or another country. Being quiet could look respectful. Being loud could look respectful. Being on time could look respectful. Being late could look respectful, depending on who you are and where you come from. So I have found it useful to be able to kind of tease those things out and make that visible inside of a class. What I think of as respectful, what you think of as respectful. So setting norms is one of the ways that I do that to help set the tone.
Totally. And we actually figured out, and so just so that you know that I'm not being disrespectful, I actually want to know if you had any questions on the YouTube. So I'm pulling up the link over there. If you do have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat on the YouTube, or here in the Zoom if you want to jump in and join. But one of the things that we found in our collaboration were those differences in how respect was taught to us. So if you haven't seen the piece, we actually might take the last half of this hour and just show it again so that people can grab it before the link is deactivated. But so Lida grew up in the North. I grew up in the South, right? We both grew up in homes with what people would call traditional families, a mother, a father, and one sibling. in the 70s, late 70s. And we both grew up in wheelchair accessible homes, right? And so we also grew up in the kind of structure, kind of one-to-one scenarios that everything seemed pretty equal. But in our house, there was a lot of dancing. In Lida's house, there was a lot of reading, right? So, right. And so the cultural differences within the same structure were very different. Things played out very differently. Lida's dance career began differently than mine. Lida was kind of coached into being kind of an expressive person early on. And I actually started dancing because I got dropped off at the wrong place in a carpool line. Like it was just like not the same thing. So how we structurally look or take the accounting of our lives in terms of landmarks and structures is very similar, but how the navigation of those things changed is also important. And that's what makes the nuance of the culture of the life that we're building. So when we think of our students, and ourselves, right? So we're at a place in our lives as professors, as people who are responsible for sharing information, and that might feel like the end of the road. But how are we constantly learning with the material and with the people who are in front of us? And how do we offer our students an invitation into our learning about not only how we're growing in our field, but how we're understanding the material? So Lida brought up something earlier about content, and I just want to kind of dismantle or kind of demystify some of what dance means in higher education, because we've had this content question come up before. And so, in an embodied practice, we are thinking about the history and culture of the body as it exists in the present moment and the things that it has brought with it, right? So, we're constantly challenging our students to be ethnographers of their own experience. And in doing that, most of our training comes with a historical lens about race, class, gender, culture that we're constantly overlaying so that our students get a full picture of where they are landing in the canon of this particular technical or artistic experience. We're also training them in the mindset of being a creator of everything around you, a synthesizer of knowledge into, or a synthesizer of information into authentic knowledge that then carries you through your life, and on the spot, tactile decision makers. Right? Many of us know that as a college student, many of our experiences had a lot to do with the decisions that we made and the pressures that we thought the impact of those decisions were going to have on our lives. And so, as we teach the skill of improvisation, we're teaching students very quickly from an embodied perspective to take a large view of the landscape that they're in, to make a choice, to commit to the choice, and then synthesize the reaction or the response later, or moment by moment if necessary, to be able to change to what the environment, the landscape, the dance, the colleagues, the people around them are needing from them, but also being very true to the capacity of their own body, artistry, intellect, and vision for themselves to grow.
One of the other things that I hear Christal starting to speak about actually is the other side of that is about listening. So one way is sort of how you make your own choices about yourself, how you share your own stories, be it that's with your body or with your voice. And the other side is then how we hear each other. And so part of how we built this particular piece, and again, a practice in our classrooms, is about how you show up to be curious about another person, recognizing that actually our differences are an asset in dance, in the world. And so feeling interested in, like, oh, I never thought about that. What was that like? Oh, I have no lived experience about what that was. What was that like? And really feeling curious and really listening. So again, like that's partly how Same But Different came, is that we would ask each other questions and then we would just listen. And thinking about listening as actually a real skill. Again, sometimes we think of that as kind of like a passive skill, and particularly like when we teach kindergartners that listening, like respect, looks like sitting still, but that isn't actually always true, right? That sometimes listening is putting something inside your body. Sometimes listening is asking a follow-up question. Sometimes listening is just being curious. And part of what the other side of that is being open that you didn't know the answer. That I actually had so many things that there was to learn about Christal and Christal's life, and that was a great place to start, opposed to feeling like I needed to already be an expert, or that I needed to always be an expert about the content in my classroom, right? Is to like make a space in my classroom to say, here's how I'm going to open the door to a conversation. Here's how I'm going to facilitate versus just to teach. The opening to say, okay, and what do you also know as students? How do you welcome that inside of a classroom, opposed to always feeling like, oh, I'm the expert, I have to know. So really making space for the listening. So that's part of what you'll see in our piece also, is how we ask each other questions and then how we listen when the other one shares.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you just a little bit of an excerpt from what we call the process pass. And I just want to show this because oftentimes, even in COVID, we kind of think that we are still functioning or that people who are doing things are still functioning on some type of normal. And so I'm going to show you a clip from the studio garage, which was my car garage at my house, where we kind of cleared out a space and started to make this piece. And so this is a little behind the scenes. And now so I wanted to show you that clip. I'm going to show you another clip of Lida in the garage. And so as we're sharing these, I just want to give you context that these were created because in order to do something new, we had to kind of also create some different structures of how dance is made. And so in order to keep ourselves engaged, because really learning is about how long can you stay engaged with a really good question, right? And how, as educators, can we keep our students engaged? So this was about keeping ourselves accountable. So what we did is we actually created this thing called the process pass. And we gave certain viewers a subscription service to see what we were doing behind the scenes. Now, this is twofold. One, it helps fund the arts, which in our country are sometimes a hard thing to do. But mostly it kept us accountable to our making process. Right, so many of you are colleagues of ours, and maybe in an academic setting, you've had some writing deadlines that if you didn't hold yourself accountable, it just didn't get done, right? But in this regard, we kind of had the public hold us accountable. So I'll show you one more clip here. And this is Lida in the garage.
Let's just do 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. What's the theme for this one?
Yeah. I don't know. I think we could do the map that we just drew.
Okay.
Or thinking about margins, or I think we could think about one of the stories we've already told.
Okay.
What stands out to you?
Let's just do, let's think about the story about home, just like what it's like to, the ramps, the house, the geography of the place.
Okay. And then you'll tell me when my 2 minutes are up?
I sure will. Ready? Begin. Oh, that was a short one. You get the point. Right.
So again, part of what we did is that we really tried to ask each other questions, and then sometimes we would answer again with our words, or sometimes we would answer with our bodies. And again, that's something that we actually do inside of our classrooms also. So I think the two clips that Christal was just showing you there were really, you sort of heard us speaking, we're trying to like figure our way out inside the garage about what are we actually doing. And one of them was thinking about the landscape of our home. So again, this idea that we both grew up in wheelchair accessible houses. And as you'll see in the performance, if you haven't seen it yet, and maybe we'll show you in a few minutes here, was this idea of like that both of us had large counters, low counters, sorry, and wide doorways, and how that helped shape us. So we did this thing where we'd ask each other about the houses that we grew up in, and we put them in our bodies, but then we also drew them. And again, as an educator, part of what I think that is like giving more than one modality of a way to answer a question. And that sometimes when you put it in your body, as you sort of like saw us working out on the in the garage studio, or when we draw it with our hands, or when we tell it with our words, or sometimes we write it out. Again, each one of those modalities helps give a different perspective. It helps sort of enter into our mind in a different way. So maybe that's something that you do as an educator. And if it's not, then I just really suggest that it's a lovely way to invite an investigation from more than one perspective, even about something that you know is your own lived experience, right? Is that like when I make a physical map with my own body of like, okay, and here's the ramp up to the front door, those kinds of things, I experience it differently. I remember it differently than when I speak it or when I write it out. And that gives me new information. And you could do that as a way to answer all sorts of different kinds of questions.
So I don't see any questions on the YouTube. What we'll do is, I think we'll show the performance. And if people have any questions, comments, or concerns, they could drop them also in the YouTube while they're viewing. So stand by 1 second.
I can just speak a little bit as Christal's setting up the video also. So part of what our idea was originally was that we were going to make a live performance. But this idea of adaptability obviously was needed in the world this year, though I think actually is always needed. That we see that over and over again, that our rigidity sometimes doesn't serve us. At least I experienced that in my own life, that my flexibility to think outside of the box, to brainstorm, has served me, and that when I've resisted it, it feels bad. Maybe you have that experience also, sort of a desire to control or to grip onto an old idea or an old pathway. So originally we thought we were going to make this piece and perform it live. Originally we were going to perform at the Flynn Center for the Performing Arts in November of, what that would be 2020. And obviously we didn't do that. And so we had to shift gears and make it a film. And we had this great opportunity where we pulled together this fabulous team. So we have two different composers that worked with us. We had this idea of having sort of same but different composers. So folks that have some similarity but some difference, that could take different parts of our stories and our work and add to the story or enhance the stories with their music. And then we worked with a dramaturge, which Christal referred to earlier. And for those of you that don't know, a dramaturge is someone, they're sort of like an editor is the way that I think of them, but with from the theater perspective. So listening to our stories helped us decide which stories that we were going to keep or not keep, how to cut them, how to edit them, so that we were selecting to tell, to make a full performance, opposed to just like, oh, here I like this story and I like that story. So you'll see the dramaturge as part of this work also in the background. And then we got to work with this great videographer, a student of ours, actually, Sam Can, who then was really an integral part of the process. So she filmed by moving her camera around, being on the stage with us, with the hope that it really would feel like we were live and with you and interactive.
So Lida's probably going to kill me for this, but this is how we work together. Somebody has a great idea, and then something else happens, and then we are very flexible. So because the link is going to be up for the rest of the day for Northern Vermont, Lida, I'm going to switch gears and show them the original 7-minute improvisation. Right. So if you've seen the piece, I want you to actually get a taste of how this thing actually came to be before the garage. So before the garage, we just kind of did this kind of 9-minute improvisation, and we'll show it to you now. And if then you'll see the full evolution of the work. So thank you, Lida, for being flexible.
Well, and maybe it's noteworthy to say that this 9 minutes actually originally came from a teacher workshop that we were doing with other educators. So again, sort of a through line of working with teachers, being teachers, thinking about how we teach as part of our artistic practice. We were doing this training with K through 12 educators here in Addison County in Vermont. And we were thinking about, again, this show and thinking about ways in which we're the same but different, but then also thinking about accessibility. And so we asked the audience, which eventually the video that Christal's about to play for you was really us in a more traditional audience and not in a workshop. But the original idea came from this group of teachers. And we would ask them to share 4 words with us around topics that they wanted us to speak about. And then from there, we would improvise both with our bodies and with our words around those 4 words, which we didn't know what they were going to be until the moment.
All right. Hold on to your hats. Here we go. It's a blast from the past.
Yeah, so word number 1, yell it out.
Sunshine.
Okay.
Sunshine.
Sunshine.
Boys.
Boys.
Waffle. Wait, poise or boys?
Boys with a B.
Oh. Okay. Sunshine. Boys. Waffle.
And
Darkness. Darkness.
And waffle.
Sunshine. Boys. Waffles.
Darkness.
Sunshine. Boys. Waffles.
Darkness.
Kate, are you ready?
Yeah. So make it beep loud.
You want a loud noise?
Yeah, we want to know.
So, yeah.
Here's what it's going to sound like.
Oh,
Thank
thanks
you.
for the tester.
Good.
Hang on.
Oh, turn
Be
it up.
louder than that. Oh, this one's fun.
Okay. All right. 7 minutes on the clock.
Yeah.
See you on the other side.
I noticed.
Just like there was so much sunshine.
Yeah, it was bright and beautiful.
Bright and beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And today they have pneumonia.
I think there's a lot of sunshine inside of me.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Honey, you don't need no depression light.
I have 2 in my office.
Happy light.
There's a lot of darkness inside of me too.
And it's a lot of noise. But it's just like anything. You either feed the sunshine or you feed the darkness, and then that's what they see.
That's right. They both come.
Right. What will they see? What will they see? How do you turn the darkness off?
Sometimes I struggle to turn it off.
Yeah.
I try and say what I'm grateful for.
I'm very confused.
I'm grateful for you.
do you do?
I never got them waffles.
I love waffles, but I'm much more of a pancake.
You are much more of a cook.
Yeah, I love to cook and I love a pancake.
Well, you know, I do like that analogy that women are like spaghetti, men are like waffles.
I have not. No one has ever said that to me. Never.
It's because the spaghetti is all mixed up with the sauce, and the waffles with those little blocks that you cut.
And is that true for you? Are you spaghetti?
I'm a little spaghetti, but I like to imagine that I can be waffles.
I think you've got some waffles.
Oh, I got some waffle in me. Like, it's either this Christal, this Christal, this Christal, this Christal. They're all saucy.
What does your darkness look like?
It looks like quiet. It looks like being in a group of people and not hearing the cacophony of sound. It's like being so exhausted from the healing that I can't tell what I'm doing. Looks like forgetting.
Mine looks like an overdrive, like just going. Or it looks like just the bed. I don't know which one is worse. Oh! I forgot that you had boys. I was just thinking about you and me.
Just to say they are forgettable.
You got boys.
I got boys!
You got two.
Yeah, what I'm trying to yell out darkness. Turn on the light, my brother! Got this. Got two boys. They're the same age gap as my brother and I. Yeah. 8 years.
That's a long time.
It's a long time. I have a lot of empathy for what my mother just did. Most of my prayers are like,
Did she make you waffles?
she made the same kind of waffles I made in the toaster.
I don't know.
Oh, you? Wait, hold on, wait. You don't?
I know. I just do it, in a round pan.
You're like a chef. I just want to just be clear. No damage to the boys. When I gave birth to the one boy, the one to make me into the woman I am now.
Yep.
A lot of trial and error.
Couple of good ones.
Oh, there were some good ones. Yeah.
Couple not so good.
Oh, ratios, people. Some of the good ones, some of the originals. Yeah, just to say hi.
Yeah. Was that nice?
I don't know. They should have kept it in the waffle. That was sweet.
That was sweet. I think my sunshine looks like big dreams. Looks like a full body.
working on it as much as I can every day.
A lot of women don't do
Oh, Christal Brown, thank you very much. And you, your sunshine?
Sunshine looks like my sunshine. S-O-N.
So that's how it all started.
Yeah, it was a great beginning. And again, part of what you're hearing, right, is our curiosity about each other, and then taking in. It's almost the same idea of like responding to who's in the room that we were talking about earlier as educators, is like responding to the audience in real time. So we have this structure where we know we're going to perform, we know we're going to dance, we know we're going to talk, but we don't exactly know how that's going to unfold or all the nitty gritty of it, and that we're going to respond to what's given to us in the moment from the audience. And so that improvisational practice has some real parallels to our teaching.
Yeah, and that we bring our full self to it. Right? I think many times as educators or as any position of power or authority that we find ourselves in, we often feel like we need to compartmentalize ourselves. And so Lida and I really also have a practice of being very human, even in places where we are in leadership roles or places where we feel like we have to kind of be in charge, right? So we're laughing, we're sharing stories that I think a lot of teachers would be like, I never tell my students that. And so we're not advocating for that. We're just saying that it's a style that works for us, right? And to find your authentic style of sharing information and being fully human is a part of the pedagogy that we're kind of opening up with this idea of same but different, and having a body of knowledge, and not just that our degrees or our training give us the knowledge that we want to share, but all of our lived experience. And as we welcome that into the classroom and share that with our students, we actually find a different level of learning, understanding, and motivation to actually learn.
And this idea of inviting lived experience into the classroom, I feel like is such an interesting one, and carries so much value. And again, I appreciate that for those of you that teach content that maybe doesn't lend itself directly to do that in the way that sometimes other content does. Like, I'm not an expert in science, but I could kind of imagine if you were teaching introduction to biology, you might feel like lived experience, past stories aren't a fundamental to biology. But I would sort of question, how could you make it such? And how do we follow some of the questions that we have of the world and of our experiences to ask each other? I was relatively recently in a training thinking about student inquiry, and how do you help welcome that into your classroom. And it was actually around a science course, and so they had us walk outside for a long time and think of all of the questions that we had about the path that we were on walking outside, and then from there came in and shared those questions and did the research. And in some ways, that's not actually any different than what we just did with Same But Different, right? It's like, feeling this sense of curiosity about what has your lived experience been like, and how do I listen to that, and how do I follow that in order to build an artistic practice, or to enhance my classroom, or to enhance your classroom and our learning together. And through all of those lenses, part of what I think you're also hearing is this real placement of community, that we're in it together, that we do better when we're together, we do better when we're all growing. I often hear Christal say, like, the same air that I'm breathing is breathing you. This idea that we're in it for this bigger goal, this bigger human growth goal. And I feel like sometimes as an educator, I can get kind of like bogged down with the nitty gritty of the emails, or the oh gosh, how am I going to grade this person about that thing? And kind of this, what I think of as actually kind of the smaller stuff. And it helps me to pull back and to remember that my goal is to help young people grow. And I happen to be doing that with young people, but regardless of who the student is. And in that, my goal is also for myself to grow, that I really want to be a fuller, brighter, braver person. And then I want to have my students feel that way too.
So we have about 12 minutes left. I've checked over to see if there are any lingering questions. But, we're in the Zoomiverse, so time is relative. What I'm going to do is over on the YouTube channel, I've put my contact information and Lida's contact information. It's just Christal at christalbrown.com or Lida at lidawinfield.com. And there's also a place there for our Facebook page, SBD Dance on Facebook, for your questions, your comments, your concerns, and your reflections about the performance or anything that we've talked about today. So we're going to just bow out. We're going to fade to black. And we appreciate your time. If you have questions, we'd love to be supportive in your pedagogy, but also just the invitation to stay curious is what we'd like to offer you as we close. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Nice to be with you.